Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1,000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. I've gone on record plenty of times in the past saying that I think the first Quincy invasion is Bleach at its best. And there are innumerable reasons for that. The sheer sense of desperation that envelops the story as powerful villains step foot into the Sternritter for the first time really since the Soul Society arc. Hell-bent on nothing but the Gotei 13's complete destruction. The incredible battles from Byakuya's fear-stricken evisceration to Yamamoto's unbelievable bankai that somehow delivered on all fronts. The feeling that everyone is coming together, struggling together against a common enemy, in a real back-and-forth battle where the smallest of victories are celebrated, where week to week we didn't know who would live and who would die. The pacing is perhaps better than it's ever been, and the first invasion remains to this day probably the tightest, best sequence of chapters the series has ever known. And yet perhaps my favourite element of the first invasion doesn't show up until the very end. Ichigo himself. Another success of the first invasion is how it manages to marry the chaos in the Soul Society with Ichigo's own personal mission seamlessly, somehow bringing everything full circle and ensuring it still feels like Ichigo's story, even though he's been sidelined for much of the showdown. Kubo places the very fate of the Soul Society on Ichigo's shoulders, very much playing up the trope that Ichigo is their one and only saviour, the only one who can rescue them, only to then exploit the expectations of that trope to bury both the Soul Society and the reader in anxiety once Ichigo has been imprisoned in the Garganta, unable to reach his friends. The very worst has happened. The enemy couldn't kill Ichigo, no, so they've done the next best thing. And so Ichigo is, from this point onwards, mentally put through the ringer, forced to listen to the collective agony of the Shinigami and yet unable to lift a finger to do anything about it. Ichigo has never had a grand, overarching goal. He just wants the power necessary to protect those closest to him. And yet, whenever he can't do that, when it's just within reach, but cruelly snatched away from him, well, his anger and his desperation become evident. And we as readers waited on the edge of our seats for Ichigo's inevitable arrival into the ruination of the Soul Society, too late to save anyone, too late to call it a victory, when nothing but the bones of the Gotei lay at his feet. In the latest installment of Bleach's best scenes, I want to take a look at the culmination of the first Quincy invasion, and how it gave us an Ichigo the likes of which we had never seen before, one whose rage had finally been unleashed. This is different to the anger Ichigo felt in the Lost Agent arc. This is less about despair, and is instead an unbridled, animalistic wrath. I want to look at the moment Ichigo's rage was finally allowed to let loose, with Kubo delivering on our wait to see Ichigo on the battlefield in the most spectacular way. So, let's dive in. Ichigo's growth has always been punctuated by moments where he loses control. Normally a very level-headed and intelligent man, some of the lowest points of Ichigo's life arrive hand in hand with that loss of control. Nearly dying in his battle with Byakuya resulted in the brief takeover by White, robbing Ichigo of control until he was able to wrestle it back. His training with the Vizard saw him slip ever deeper into hollowification, becoming a monster that couldn't be tamed save from within. After dying at the hands of Ulquiorra, Ichigo is reborn, but as a beast of pure instinct, unable or perhaps unwilling to listen to reason, resulting even in Ichigo stabbing one of his closest friends. And of course, all of this culminates in Ichigo utterly losing himself in the Lost Agent arc, his rage and despair knowing no bounds, as he resolves to kill Tsukishima for what he's done to Ichigo's family and friends. What's truly scary about Ichigo's rage during the first Quincy invasion, however, is that he is fully in control. Not of the evolving, wider situation that's escalating around him, perhaps, no, but of himself, yes. Kubo highlights that with his art. The measured stance of Ichigo standing in the dark of the rainfall, illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning, his fist clenched. Perhaps one of the single best pages in the entire series, which is then followed up by a critical close-up of Ichigo's expression, designed to give us an all-important insight into how Ichigo is currently feeling, into what he is currently thinking, done without words. And we see that there is nothing on his face but ferocity. His eyes alive with determination and anger, but it is a controlled determination, a controlled anger. This really is Ichigo like we have never seen him before. The version of Ichigo we see in the Lost Agent arc is covered in sweat, huge dark bags forming under his eyes as he shakes from the stress, his body barely holding back his fury. But this is totally different. This is an entirely new beast. One who, despite his seething anger, is still capable of breathing. There's a calmness to this rage, and that makes it all the more impactful. Of course, once Ichigo is freed from the Garganta, the first thing he sees is a named character, Akon, the one who sacrificed so much just to get him through the door, collapse in front of him, Quincy daggers jutting out of his back. Bodies litter the makeshift 12th Division terminal as Shaz Domino scoffs that he doesn't even know who Ichigo is. In a brilliant piece of storytelling, we get to see the world from Ichigo's perspective. And again, that is crucial to understanding his mindset as he steps onto the battlefield for the first time. I love that the first time Ichigo lays eyes on what's going on in the Soul Society, it's done in a way that we get to experience it along with him. He rushes Shaz without a word, instantly obliterating the Sternritter with a massive Getsuga Tensho, ripping through him without the usual pomp and circumstance of the genre, alerting the entire war zone to his presence. But he's not afraid. He's not here to try and be stealthy. Ichigo wants to make an impact. He wants his presence to be known, if only because he has a statement to deliver. And what a wonderful example of showing and not telling. Knowing what we do about Ichigo, it is highly unusual for him to not even hear an enemy out. But instead, he simply flies forwards and takes Shaz out without so much as an introduction. Sadly, the supplementary material revealed that Shaz survived, which I never liked personally. Let's let Ichigo's fury have this moment. The anime adds a nice little touch here. Ichigo takes the time to rescue Akon, removing him from harm's way, and this only reinforces what I was saying earlier. This is an Ichigo who is consumed by a rage unfettered, and yet he is of calm mind. Calm enough to save Akon and get him to safety before moving on. Ichigo scans the battlefield, taking in the sight of a Soul Society on fire. Sensing that both Rukia and Renji are heavily injured but thankfully alive, Ichigo moves on to his more pressing target, Byakuya, whose Reiatsu is very nearly gone. The more I think about it, the more I think this might be my favourite scene in all of Bleach. And I know that is incredibly lofty praise, but I'm serious. It is the perfect conclusion to Byakuya's development. But it also does absolute wonders for Ichigo too. Ichigo arrives in front of Byakuya's shattered body, the captain looking so small now, so tiny, half buried in a wall, blood caking the stone around him. Believing his time is nearly up, Byakuya speaks with Ichigo for what he thinks might be the last time. Crimson streaks running down his chin. Rain lashes unforgivingly around them. Byakuya despairs, tears rolling down the once proud captain's face. He knows he's failed. As the stalwart model Shinigami, Byakuya being torn down is representative of the Soul Society's own death, in some ways even more so than Yamamoto's actual death. And now he, who once represented the very authority of the Shinigami to Ichigo on a personal level, must turn now to Ichigo of all people. In Byakuya's own words, "You, on the other hand, are a human. Not only should you not be involved in this fight, you shouldn't even be here in the first place." It sounds mean-spirited, as though Byakuya is disregarding Ichigo and almost attempting to get rid of him, but it isn't. Byakuya believes the Soul Society should be fighting its own battles as a large military organization, that Ichigo, as a human boy, should be out living his own life, that he doesn't need to put himself in harm's way for them. And yet, of course, he's here anyway, because there's no way he wouldn't be. And Byakuya knows that. He recognizes that. This is very different to the time in Waco Mundo, where Byakuya told Ichigo that no one in the Gotei 13 would require his help. In fact, it's the opposite. That scene in Waco Mundo feels almost quaint in comparison to this, like Byakuya admonishing a cocky child. Here, he is pleading with a man. It's the sad realization from Byakuya that yes, they do need to involve him even against their wishes, mostly because nowadays they want to see him safe. But this video isn't about Byakuya, though he is crucial to this scene's success. I love that Kubo doesn't show Ichigo's face until the very end. It's excellent restraint. And he barely says a word either. There are no quips, no remarks, nothing. Just affirmation that Rukia and Renji are alive, as though Ichigo knows that's all Byakuya needs to hear right now. Again, this is Ichigo completely enraged, but keeping a lid on it. He's able to remain calm, but that anger is bubbling inside him. As a desperate Byakuya finally pleads with Ichigo to protect the Soul Society, lightning strikes, illuminating an otherwise silhouetted Ichigo. His eyes gleam. This is going to sound weird, but this is possibly my favourite Ichigo face in the entire story. It is impeccably drawn and a true testament to Kubo's artistic skill and vision. It conveys everything it needs to. But those few panels in this section we're talking about here are possibly, like I said earlier, my favourite in Bleach. Byakuya's lone tear mixed in with the rain, his plea, Ichigo's form half draped in shadow, his gaze fixed ever forwards. It's brilliant stuff, and even though he is seething with anger, it feels so different to the examples I gave earlier where he loses control, because this time he knows what to do. He knows what the answer is. Ichigo and Byakuya's relationship is one of the absolute best in Bleach, as has been discussed numerous times before, and this is its pinnacle, its summit, and a masterclass in writing. While I ultimately prefer the version in the source material, the anime adds its own flourish to the scene too, which I do quite like. I was hoping the scene would play out with absolutely no music whatsoever, but they gave me the next best thing. a quiet, recessive soundtrack that runs softly in the background, almost matching but never deafening the sound of the rain. I like that time seems to slow around Ichigo as the rain evaporates on contact with his body, his power surging as his anger reaches its boiling point, that raw energy translating into a furious heat that burns the very air. It's an awesome touch. But of course, it's not over yet. Ichigo gets a chance to unleash this rage that's been boiling over since he was imprisoned within the Garganta. He gets a chance to be the voice of the trampled Soul Society and to stand up to Yhwach and all that he wants to do and has done. I love the sheer defiance of Ichigo when he arrives to confront the Quincy King, this man he has never met before. We've only known Yhwach ourselves for a handful of volumes at this point, but we know enough. We know he's a tyrant, a despot who kills on a whim, whose own subjects are absolutely terrified of him, and yet Ichigo slings Tensa Zangetsu down from the heavens themselves, ramming the blade into the ground in front of Yhwach's boot, preventing the villain from leaving in a sheer display of disrespect. At this point in time, Ichigo doesn't care who he is, and he's sure as hell not afraid of him either. There's simply no way Yhwach is walking out of here without answering for his crimes, and Ichigo is looking to be judge, jury, and executioner. For a moment, Ichigo doesn't say anything. There's a wonderful shot of him retrieving his Zanpakuto from the ground and lifting it to meet his enemy, clarity in his eyes. Ichigo's face is paramount to this all working as well as it does, by the way. His expressions are absolutely worth paying attention to. Kubo is doing everything in his power to tell you that Ichigo is in a good state of mind, all things considered. And yet, in the face of such devastation and wanton destruction, Ichigo can only contain that rage for so long. Trying to get a straight answer out of Yhwach is apparently impossible, and so Ichigo explodes, lifting his head and roaring at the Quincy King, screaming at him, demanding to know if he's the leader, if he's the one who orchestrated this callous attack. With a smirk, Yhwach confesses that he is, and Ichigo's power ruptures the very earth around him, shooting up into the sky like a tempestuous flame. Ichigo lunges for Yhwach, flinging a Getsugatensho at the king, who merely forces his way through the energy blast, his outstretched hand grappling with Ichigo's arm and driving the boy into the ground. This is a great little skirmish. Kubo draws Yhwach to look absolutely massive in the frame to hammer that point home. Seriously, look at the size of his hand when he grabs Ichigo's arm. It's colossal. But this is my favourite kind of Ichigo out of his depth. By which I mean, despite the insurmountable odds, there is no despair here whatsoever, which is very refreshing. Instead, he is determined to take Yhwach down no matter what, even if he knowingly doesn't stand a chance. You might think it reckless, bullish, maybe even foolhardy, but there is nothing quite like seeing a rageful Ichigo actually getting the chance to fight with everything he's got. And tellingly, unlike in The Lost Agent, there is no mention of killing here despite the circumstances. Ichigo is still very much in control of himself, he still has his sights set on the prize. Even after being slammed into the floor, Ichigo reaches for Yhwach with his bare hand, desperate to do anything to get some kind of a hit in. Again, this is an awesome display of Ichigo's fury now that his rage has been unleashed. I mean, what was he going to do exactly? Claw out Yhwach's eyes, grab his throat and try and choke him to death? I have no idea, and I'm not sure Ichigo does either. This is one of those things that all happens in the moment, but it's evocative all the same. Yhwach swats his hand away effortlessly and stabs Ichigo in the throat, seemingly ending the struggle, but it isn't over. Blue vein spreads across Ichigo's neck, repelling Yhwach's blade, and Ichigo himself just continues to look enraged, his fangs bared like an animal caught in a trap. This Ichigo is very much too angry to die, and I'm all here for it. With Yhwach now firmly in his sights, Ichigo rips through him with a point-blank Getsuga Tensho, finally scoring that much-needed hit. Although Yhwach eventually gets the better of Ichigo once again, beginning to destabilize him with some cryptic taunts about his mother, Ichigo has held his ground for the most part. And even then, as Yhwach and Hashwolf turn to leave, he still isn't having it. Demanding they stand and face him, Ichigo continues to bark at them, blood and bruises now covering his face as the rain plasters his sopping wet hair to his forehead. I mean, what an amazing sequence, culminating in Ichigo rushing for them while their backs are turned. Something that is admittedly out of character for Ichigo, but that's the severity of the situation laid bare. Ichigo has officially reached the end of his rope. They simply can't be allowed to just leave after everything they've done, but his anger, no matter how focused it may be, still has consequences as Hashwolf cuts Ichigo's bankai clean in half, rendering him impotent. I almost wish Ichigo did just a little better against Yhwach in this first confrontation, just to add to the cathartic feeling of seeing Ichigo venting that rage, of feeling it loosed upon the world. But I understand that from a story and character perspective, the way it played out makes the most sense. Ultimately, this isn't supposed to be a satisfying moment. This isn't supposed to be a victory. And therefore, since that moment never comes for Ichigo, it never comes for us either. And so as we begin to round out another edition of Bleach's best scenes, this one really is special. Today we've taken a look at this sequence from the perspective of Ichigo and his anger, but there are so many different angles it can be viewed from. But Ichigo has never felt more ferocious than he does here. His purpose complete and clear, both to him and the reader. I think looking back at those moments of uncontrollable rage and power from the past makes for a good comparison point. Here in chapter 512 specifically, though also 513 and some of 514, Ichigo feels like he's on a totally different level to where he's been before. This is combining everything. The rage Ichigo feels at the wider scope of the destruction facing the Soul Society with the more personal sense of loss, devastation, and the anger that comes from his inability to protect, as characters like Rukia, Renji, and especially Byakuya are suffering immensely. The way Kubo holds Ichigo back until the perfect moment, like a dog on a leash, is exceptionally smart. He knows he's going to release him eventually, it's just a matter of when and what kind of a situation Ichigo will find himself running headfirst into. And so, we spend the entirety of the first Quincy invasion already on tenterhooks as it is, week to week, simply waiting for Ichigo's fated arrival. Kubo having successfully riled him up, forced him to the edge of oblivion, only to finally, suddenly cut Ichigo loose at the apex of the invasion, and when that time comes, it's truly unlike anything we've ever seen from him before. Alright guys, but that's it for the latest edition of Bleach's best scenes. I really hope you enjoyed the video, maybe you took something away from it as well. Either way, I hope you loved it. Thank you so much for your constant support, thank you so much for watching the video, and as always I want to end the video by saying a massive shout out and giving a huge thank you to my supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Without you, I simply couldn't be doing this, so it really does mean the absolute world to me. If you too love what I do here over on YouTube and you want to support the channel even further, thank you. You can do that by visiting my Patreon page, which you can find in the description of this video, and supporting me there for as little as $1 a month. Doing so will get your name in the credits of every single video just like this. And by supporting me at $2 or higher, you can get every single video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright guys, thanks again for watching, I really do appreciate it, and until next time I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.